Alright guys, we got a video here from Matt McMuscles today. We're going to find out what happened to the SEGA Dreamcast. Make sure you give him a sub, myself a sub. Let's get into it.
Taking a look at the SEGA Dreamcast, the perennial most underrated console of all time Grand Slam winner, that while had a lot of positives, also has the dubious distinction of being what caused SEGA to leave the hardware business. But did it? Yes. But did it really? No.
I'd love to hear more about this story because I got the Dreamcast, I think, late 1999, early 2000s, right? I thought it was wonderful. I had so much fun with it. And then all of a sudden, just like that, it seemed like less than 2 years later, it was discontinued, no longer supported. And like, I was having a good time with this. The games are good. It was a fun experience. It had a lot of great accessories. Yeah, I mean, we're going to find out what it was all about today.
Let's dispel that confusion and really dive into the Dreamcast, really find out what makes it tick, and most importantly, what it's thinking. Now, if you're a younger gamer, you might know SEGA as the company that puts out games with either Sonic or Kiryu on the cover, maybe a Total War here and there, and sells the same 30 ROMs every couple of months. But they have a long-lasting, almost 60-year history that, for the purposes of this story, we'll need to briefly touch upon.
Okay.
The Master System, SEGA's answer to Nintendo's 8-bit machine, didn't do all that well in Japan, but had an encouraging start in both Europe and the US, although
I didn't even realize North America really played the Master System that much, because whenever I ask someone in the United States, you remember the Master System, they're like, what, the Genesis? I'm like, no, the Master System. Most people don't seem to remember it. In Europe and Australia and Brazil, however, it was the bee's knees. It almost kept up with the NES. It was really, really popular everywhere else. But yeah, I was always hoping they'd re-release their legacy Master System titles, but it almost feels like SEGA doesn't have confidence to bring them out and things like Switch and all that. But I'm digressing. Let's continue.
not nearly enough to make a dent in the mid-80s Nintendo-domination. It wasn't until the sleek-looking Genesis/Mega Drive, a system that greatly outperformed the NES, that SEGA started to make some serious headway in the console market.
Sure.
But it wasn't really until Sonic the Hedgehog sped into stores in 1991 where that headway started to become a credible lead.
Well, that's where the whole Mario and Sonic thing began, hey? I remember when Master System came out, the original mascot was Alex the Kid, and you had Alex the Kid in Miracle World as a built-in game for Sega Master System 2. It was super popular. It looked like there was big potential for him to be the big Sega mascot. Then you had mediocre titles come out, like Alex Kidd and the Lost Stars, High Tech World, Shinobi World, which some people liked. But it just wasn't enough to even hold a candle towards Mario, right? So Sega wasn't really on the map until Sonic made his appearance, I guess.
SEGA has never recaptured the success of the Jenny Drive, selling almost 50 million units worldwide, with the Dreamcast unfortunately coming up the shortest in matching that number. Now, why is that? Well, let's find out. The runaway success of the Blue Blur, along with some great arcade ports and sports titles, were squandered when, instead of letting the Genesis simply phase out and hype the upcoming Saturn, in late 1992 they decided to prop up the Genesis with its first add-on, rather than focusing on additional chips and new graphical techniques like Nintendo was exploring.
Yeah, they did not one but two add-ons for Sega Genesis, right? So you had the 32X. That was a big waste of time. That really didn't feel like much of an upgrade. You could have probably added a chip to most of the games to make them as I don't know. I mean, I'm not a producer or anything, but yeah, that just seemed like a big waste of time. And then you had the Mega CD. Obviously, that had to, I suppose, walk so other CD-based systems could run. And you know, I'll admit at the time it kind of looked cool, but the games were sort of a bust, and just that full motion video was just so grainy at the time. Most of the titles on the CD are unplayable now, at least the CD-based ones. You know, you got games like Final Fight CD and Terminator and all that are still really fun. But the CD-ish games were kind of a bust. You know, a lot of people talked about Sewer Shark. I think most people wouldn't even play that anymore. And then, so by then, I think people had Sega fatigue because they were milking the Genesis and the add-ons for everything it was worth. And then you'll hear the story about the Saturn, obviously.
Thus, the SEGA CD was born, and everyone was asked the eternal question,
Hey, you still don't have a SEGA CD?
No. No, I don't think I will.
The former head of Sega Europe, Mike Brogan, in an interview with Eurogamer, puts it simply. Add-on devices don't increase market share. By their very nature, they sell into the existing customer base only.
Yeah, he's spot on. And I think that's part of the reason why the Wii U failed. Because when the Wii U came out, everyone probably thought it was just like, like a Wii 1.5 or like some kind of add-on, so to speak. Because they didn't market it properly as a next-gen console. I would assume that's part of the reason why it flopped. And so, yeah, if you're going from like Sega Mega Drive, you need to either do another console or Mega Drive 2. And yeah, I mean, you're not growing market share, he's spot on. I mean, that's
Sega's thought here was that the Genesis would continue to be their mainstream console for years to come and wanted to sell additional add-ons for it, while the Sega Saturn would be their big elite sort of option that they would market to the hardcore. That was the initial thought, at least. Because that mainstream existing customer base wasn't all that into the Sega CD, funnily enough. It was a cheap, slow, consumer-grade CD drive that mostly resulted in grainy, gameplay-less FMV titles.
You know, we nearly got one. But I didn't realize at the time you actually needed a Sega Genesis as well. So we went to the Mr. Toys Toy World to go get a Mega CD, I think in 93, 94, because we heard about all the controversy with Night Trap, right? And so we went in there, and not only was it really expensive, but we didn't have a Sega Genesis at the time. So we found out we had to get a Genesis, the Mega CD, and the only game on display was InXS. For some reason, the InXS game was on display. I don't know in what universe Sega thought they would sell consoles with or add-ons, I should say, with the InXS game. But the whole thing looked like a complete waste of time. And back then, I think all that was like $800-900. And it's like, fuck, back then in the early 90s, that was a no from my grandma. That was a no.
More traditional ones, like, say, Mortal Kombat CD, were barely improved upon over the Genesis versions. One of the few highlights was, of course, Sonic CD, but the price of the add-on, $299 at launch, limited the amount of people who could even play it.
As I said, I had to get the Sega Genesis and the Mega CD, so including that and all the other games, it was so much more money.
And finally, despite all those cost-saving measures, Sega still sold the CD unit at a loss, something the company did fairly regularly. But whatever, Sega can take a few hits. The Genesis and Sonic will carry them through. Now, since the Saturn was taking a while to come out in the US, which just so happened to be Sega's biggest market, they felt they needed another product in the meantime, since Genesis sales started to slow. This, of course, resulted in the legendary 32X.
I didn't realize the 32X came out after the Sega CD. That is really interesting. Now, I actually rented a 32X when I finally did get a Sega Genesis, and the only reason I got it was because I wanted to play Doom on the 32X. The only way I was able to play Doom was at my dad's house on holidays. And so I wanted to be able to play Doom at home, and it was a pretty lousy port, and I remember the rental price, I think for the weekend or for a night, for Doom and the 32X, back in the 90s, mid-90s, it was like a $20 rental Australian. Fuck. Yeah, I should have just bought the damn thing. Although now I think of it, I'm glad I did it.
Which was originally pitched to be its own standalone console, the Neptune, before Sega decided to make a very last-minute pivot. Since its only reason to exist was to kill time until the Saturn launch, it was decided that building another standalone console would just be too expensive for a stopgap system. Therefore,
yeah, I mean, you're just going to lose confidence from your consumer base if you're just constantly trying to milk them for everything that they're worth, right? There is such thing as too much, and there's a big phrase, if you get greedy, you get nothing. And it just feels like in this time period, it just felt like Sega was trying to capitalize. As a company, you're supposed to make money, right? But they weren't really offering the quality in return. So I think even before the Saturn came out, Sega fans were starting to get massively fatigued.
Or add-on! But why even really do this to begin with? Former Sega of America employee Scott Bayless was right on the front lines. The 32X was born in a call from SEGA of Japan president Hayao Nakayama to SEGA of America's R&D head Joe Miller. He was on a speakerphone, and there were several of us in Joe's suite at CES in Vegas. Mr. Nakayama basically said that we had to do something about Atari's forthcoming 64-bit Jaguar console.
And how many games came out in Atari Jaguar? About 5? Slight exaggeration. And if I'm wrong, let me know, Aussies, but I don't even think it released over here. I don't remember ever seeing it. I've only ever known about the Atari Jaguar's existence because now that I'm in sort of more gaming circles and I'm a content creator streamer, that's how I kind of learnt about it. I didn't see it back in the 90s. But hey, I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? I guess Sega weren't to know that they were going to flop. But anyway.
He was worried about it. Okay, let's take a minute here, breathe in, and read that last line again. We have to do something about the Atari Jaguar. So, when you are born of an idea as stupid as that, it's no surprise the 32X was an even bigger failure than the Sega CD.
I will tell you one thing I liked about the 32X, and it's not enough to sell units, and it's not value for money. But you weren't able to get perfect arcade ports of certain games until the 32X. And so when you had the 32X add-on, you could finally play the versions of Afterburner and Space Harrier and things like that, just as they were in the arcades in the mid-80s. With that being said, it's also 10 years too late, right?
Lasting only 6 months on the market, and aside from some competent ports like Virtua Fighter and Doom, it had very little to offer. Bayless again cuts to the core of Sega's problems around this time. Where it started to go sideways was in implementation. By the time it got to market, the 32X had been pared down significantly for cost reasons, but that reduction severely impaired its functionality, leaving it in a weird, uncompetitive space versus other devices that were looming on the horizon.
You should have just cancelled the unit then, rather than release a complete flop, lose that loyalty, and have your consumers think you're a piece of crap as a company then. Just my thoughts.
I think the decision to respond to the Jaguar was symptomatic of that pervasive lack of direction that lay below the surface at Sega. Without a clear vision, we were just reacting. But Sega can take a few hits. The Saturn is coming out and Sonic will see them through, right? Unfortunately, due to all this, Sega lost a lot of goodwill from fans around this time, and because of all the impending competition, their Saturn was already put in a difficult position. Sega also miscalculated when designing the Saturn and thought sprite scaling was the future rather than full 3D, and thus built the Saturn around that philosophy.
I didn't even know that was the thing. I will say this though, right? There was always a uniqueness to certain games, especially some of the first-party games on Sega Saturn. And now I can understand why. I didn't even realize they used a different approach to the production of the system. I kind of like the style, to be honest, because it kind of had a bit of an arcadey feel, but it might not have been for everybody.
However, the competition had bet big on 3D for their respective machines, and when compared side by side with the Saturn, Sega's new console looked little unimpressive. There was more than that, though. The botched and hurried North American launch, the loss of several big third-party games, the lack of a mainline Sonic title, competition from Nintendo, and for a bevy of other reasons, their Saturn failed to achieve the same success as the Mega Genesis.
Didn't Sony do the big mic drop moment where there was like this big games presentation and Sega's like, we're doing this, and then $3.99. And then Sony came out and staged right, and then was like $2.99. Mic drop. Wasn't that kind of how it happened? I might be getting my history confused, but let me know in the comments.
Even shifting 10 million consoles worldwide, with a lifespan of roughly 4 years. Sega couldn't take any more hits like that. They needed to knock it out of the park with their next console, so they decided to make one more big play to place all their hopes and financial future on a dream.
We're finally getting up to the Dreamcast section of this video, but I can understand you kind of do need to do a quick little recap on Sega's history in order to get some context. So this all makes sense. So what we've kind of learned so far right now is Sega had a bit of a warm start with the Master System, went really hot with the Genesis and Sonic, had a few major flops, and now we got the Dreamcast. So just going by the first 5 minutes of this video, I'm going to assume that there's consumer fatigue, maybe a lack of loyalty now, and now they're bringing out the Dreamcast. So let's have a look and see how this went.
In 1997, SEGA of Japan tasked 2 teams to make the Dreamcast architecture, then titled Project Katana, a so much cooler name, with both teams, who weren't even aware of each other, being on opposite ends of the world. One team focused on American technology and entered a contract with 3DFX to use their chipset as the base, while the Japanese team favored a Hitachi CPU architecture instead. Now, here's where things get interesting. Hey, here's that what happened you ordered! While many reasons can be cited as to why the Dreamcast ultimately failed to save the company, with most of them being pretty overt, the competition from the PS2, the fans they lost due to the add-ons, and Sonic's waning popularity, there's also many behind-the-scenes reasons that helped as well.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of things went to crap behind the scenes, but let's be honest, and I'm just going to pull a couple of games that I know off the top of my head. You had Tokyo Extreme Racer, aka Tokyo Highway Battle on Dreamcast, Code Veronica, and those games came out on a system that was released in 1999, right? And I thought they looked absolutely fantastic on that console, just as good, if not even better, than on the PlayStation 2. Now, I don't know the hardware specs of the Sega, but it felt like the games and the system itself ran great, was ahead of its time. I owned one, I even ran the internet on it, which was pretty cool, albeit that it was dial-up. The system itself seemed fine. I thought they got into the market early. They were very brave. I would have assumed they would be okay, honestly, going up against PlayStation. But I don't know.
3DFX in the mid to late 90s was gaining traction for their chipsets, which powered awesome arcade hits like San Francisco Rush, Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey, and of course, Mace: The Dark Age.
The Executioner versus Mordos.
Yeah, the arcade games on Sega Dreamcast were phenomenal. Everything, but look, some of those arcade games were great, like Royal Rumble, but you could get Sega Bass Fishing and actually get the Sega Rod fishing rod pairable, which I had. House of the Dead 2 was a wonderful port. You had the light gun for that, and there were other ones as well. Some of the games didn't have as much substance. You know, you're paying full price for something like Dynamite Cop, which is like a spiritual sequel to Die Hard. That's not a very long game. But you sort of had like Resident Evil-y games, I guess, like, I think, what was it, Blue Steel? And then like really ambitious games like Shenmue. So there was a lot to offer. Also some RPGs as well. I just don't know what went wrong. I thought it was a really, really good system. It did a really good job bringing the arcade to the home, but also added substance if that's what players were looking for as well. So I'm still bewildered that it failed.
Thus, the company went public, and when that happened, they let slip that they were providing chips for Sega's next machine, which wasn't even announced yet, prompting Sega to go
Ballistic.
The Japanese office were furious with this leak and thus severed their contract with the chipmaker due to this injustice, despite the 3DFX architecture being the technically superior design. 3DFX, for their part, sued Sega for this breach of contract, and they eventually settled out of court. It's not publicly known how much Sega had to pay due to all this, but things are obviously getting rough for the Dreamcast, and the fucking thing wasn't even fully designed yet. Obviously, due to all these legal oopsies, Sega of Japan went with the Hitachi architecture in lieu of the more powerful 3DFX version. With the specs locked, Sega started courting various publishers to start making games for the cast of Dreams, but things unfortunately went sideways with one of their longtime partners.
It just makes me think what could have been, because like I said, I always already thought the Dreamcast looked and performed amazingly, so imagine if the deal with 3DFX was still a thing, right? I mean, what would have been? I don't even know if it would have made much of a difference. I mean, what do you guys think?
Say what you want about EA nowadays, believe me, I do, but in the 90s they were well respected and supported the hell out of Sega's past consoles. However, Electronic Arts were also fans of 3DFX and had even invested in the company, so when they saw the Dreamcast specs, they were skeptical and ultimately passed on supporting the machine. According to EA exec Bing Gordon, if Sega had picked the direct competitor to 3DFX at the time, it would have been fine, but they picked someone we had never even heard of.
So I'm trying to think of what sports games are on the Dreamcast now, because there was a few of them. And was it 2K that was supporting the Dreamcast? I know Sega made a few things in-house as well, like Sega GT, all that. That's technically a racing game. Yeah, wow. I mean, there was the wrestling games on there. Again, that's only technically sport as well. You come to think of it, there was obviously sports games on Dreamcast, but no standout ones that I remember playing.
Somebody's friend of somebody's friend at a Japanese country club. It was a head-scratcher. Like, what are they doing? That was mostly it. Because of this now missing chunk in their gaming portfolio, sports titles were a must, Sega had to spend their own money to establish the 2K sports brand, and while this was certainly costly, the rise of a competitive alternative to EA is seen as a milestone within the gaming industry. While it, would have been easier for EA to have simply supported the system from the get-go, the long-standing effects of this decision are monumental. The rest of the Dreamcast core design and features were a classic example of ticking all the boxes. 4 controller ports to combat the N64, higher capacity
Yeah, that Dreamcast system was pretty sleek. It didn't take up too much room, and it just had enough ports to fit everything you needed into it. I mean, I love the design of the thing.
Discs to rival the PlayStation, internet connectivity, and a cable at the bottom of the controller for some reason, and of course the crown jewel, the VMU.
Yeah, I don't remember using the VMU much, but it was enough of a gimmick to draw some interest towards a Dreamcast, because apparently you could play little mini games on it, have virtual pets on it. I think I downloaded something from Sonic Adventure onto the VMU, and you had some kind of little mini thing you could play behind the scenes and put back in your game. It's so many years ago, I don't remember now. The most important thing about the VMU was to save your games, obviously, but you'd have little bonus things you could use it with as well, which was more of a gimmick. Hey, like I said, enough to pique interest for people.
Also, whereas Sega's last few machines were lagging behind in the power department, the Dreamcast shined here in pretty much all regards. But the problem here was the timing. The console was designed to beat the PlayStation and the N64, and wasn't exactly concerned with the future, which always seemed to be a problem at Sega. It landed in the US, Sega's biggest market, on $99.99. Remember that? Yeah, well, all Sega fans remember that, and make sure to bring it up every single September. All of Sega's hard work and money spending did result in one of the best launch lineups up until that point, and some would say of all time. Soul Calibur, Hydro Thunder, NFL 2K, Power Stone, House of the Dead 2, and yes, Sonic Adventure.
Yeah, well, let's have a look at the Soul Calibur. I mean, the first couple games, I think people are going to be like, mwah. I mean, they're still fun to play. Even the Switch just released the second one again in their GameCube collection. Hydro Thunder, people have gotten me to play that a couple times. I like it, maybe not a lot of depth, but a fun arcadey wave racing type of game. Then you've got NFL 2K, didn't play that. Power Stone, kind of like sort of one of those 2.5D sort of like arena-based, I guess, combat games. It's interesting, not really experienced, but a lot of people do like it. House of the Dead 2, man, I had the light gun for that. That was a great port. And Sonic Adventure, I really hope they re-release a remaster of that eventually and add a movable camera and a compass so you can see where you're going and like where you need to be. And because I just feel like it's missing like a HUD or some quality of life improvements by today's standards. But I mean, even that game was absolutely fantastic.
The console's big marquee title. Even Sony was nervous enough about the launch that they purposely positioned the US version of Final Fantasy VIII to come out that exact same day.
Oh, you assholes. Oh, I love it. I love it. So not only did they do the mic drop and ruin the launch of the freaking Sega Saturn, but Sony's like, yeah, we're going to ruin it for you guys again and drop the whole Final Fantasy VIII. And, you know, a lot of, you know, Sony fans complain about Final Fantasy VIII because Final Fantasy VII, not digressing too much, was like one of the first mainstream Final Fantasy games. So I think people buying 8 expected more Cloud, more Tifa, and all that kind of stuff. But the hype was real after how good the seventh one was. So, I mean, doing a dog move like that, oh, geez. Especially since Final Fantasy is not on the Sega as well.
People were excited, and the sales at first were very brisk, with Sega touting it as the best console launch of all time. In terms of profit, over $130 million were made in the launch week alone. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, Sega had a habit of launching and selling things at a loss.
That's no good.
So it won't surprise some to know that Sega had spent far more than that launch week of profit just bringing the Dreamcast to market.
Well, you know, actually a lot of companies start off at a loss on their systems. It's not unusual, I think, to be at a loss $20 or $30 on a system. I mean, I don't have the figures in front of me. You can do your own research. But how the companies want to make money is through their games, right? And their game libraries and things like that. So it's not as quite common as you think to temporarily sell a system at a slight loss.
They needed to sell even more games and to sell them very quickly to start recouping costs. And within just a few short months, the Dreamcast's front-loaded library gave way to more and more arcade ports, which around this time were becoming less attractive to gamers. You can't build...
that's true. I'm not going to lie. The Dreamcast was arcade port heavy, and they were all fantastic. And there was a lot of depth. Like I said, I mentioned the games earlier, but there probably could have been just a little bit more depth, because it was definitely a very arcade-heavy console, especially with the fighting games and like the fishing games and everything I mentioned before. But yes.
The varied library when a massive chunk of your titles were built around quick, quarter-munching experiences. You also need longer, more nuanced products as well. There were a few big gets and exclusives though, like Resident Evil CV, Quake 3, and Skies of Arcadia. But as good as those were, it just wasn't enough.
Fair enough.
Very, very quickly, Sega could see that the console was already flagging due to the low attach rate. Many people bought Sonic, but not much else. While the lack of variety in the library was a problem, there was also the fact that many people were simply waiting for the mighty PlayStation 2
in hindsight, the lack of library is probably one of the biggest problems now I think about. Now I think about how many games I had on Sony PlayStation and the depth and the big cinema, like everything from Final Fantasy to Metal Gear to even comprehensive fighting games like Tekken 3. Man, that had a wealth of content in it as well. And these are just all games off the top of my head. Alundra, just so many other games. So you look at the Dreamcast in comparison, what they did offer was quality experiences, but much shorter experiences. And so, yeah, I'll admit, even though I loved my Dreamcast, I mean, I was still going back and playing PlayStation 1 games, and this is even before I had a PS2 and an Xbox.
Arrive, something Sega hadn't really planned on. To hopefully fix all this, they decided they needed something new, something immersive, a killer app that would turn heads and make people go, oh right, the Dreamcast. That game was Yu Suzuki's Shenmue. Suzuki is often seen as Sega's Miyamoto, creating so many classic franchises for the company, it just boggles the mind.
Yeah. So, when it comes to Shenmue and my own personal experience, I have all three of the games actually ported on my PlayStation. I'm a big fan of Like a Dragon and Yakuza. I think Shenmue kind of walked so that franchise could run. Big fan, love it. One of my favorite franchises ever. I've tried to go back into Shenmue, and unfortunately, because I didn't grow up with that title, going back to it now just kind of seems like a slow, boring slog. So it's hard to have a further opinion on Shenmue because I didn't grow up in the time that it came out. Sometimes games are great at the time but don't hold up, and then some classics will always hold up. It's funny how that works out. But let's see the story behind Shenmue here.
Virtua Fighter is obviously one of the most prolific, and speaking of which, that's what Shenmue began as, Virtua Fighter RPG for the Saturn, before it was moved to the Dreamcast and greatly expanded upon, and conversely, was greatly splurged upon. Sega invested $50 million and some have estimated far more to produce Shenmue for the Dreamcast, the most expensive game of its day. And
I mean, $50 million, you think about games now, $100 million, $150 million. I mean, this is like 25 years later. So a $50 million game back in 2000, 2001, holy jeez balls. I mean, what would that be now? Probably about 100 million now, pretty close to it. I mean, adjust that for inflation, everybody.
It really was the first of its kind, an
Gaming's
example
a lot
of
more
what video
popular now,
games
too.
could be. A massive, sprawling, cinematic open-world game where the player could do pretty much anything they wanted, well, within certain restrictions, of course.
Years ago, I was Chinese.
How do you be Chinese and then all of a sudden not Chinese anymore? Unless we're just talking citizenships. That was just a big for a second.
Is that so?
Many aspects of modern video gaming owe a lot to the innovations and freedom Shenmue pioneered. But the last thing Sega should have been doing right then was spending more money they barely had.
Sure.
Despite it selling well when it hit stores in early November of 2000, Shenmue didn't really improve Dreamcast sales, nor
Well, I mean, how are you going to make $50 million back? I mean, just think about how much. I mean, I'm not going to do basic mathematics now, but you'd also have to take into account how many units of the Dreamcast they sell. Did they say it was like 9 million or something? You'd pretty much have to rely on every single person that has a Dreamcast buying a copy of Shenmue.
did it increase the console's attach rate, and certainly didn't stop the record-setting launch of the PS2, which occurred only a few weeks before. The thunderous hype of Sony's console sequel, its graphical edge over the Dreamcast, and the support of publishers like Square and Electronic Arts is certainly viewed as the death nail in the death coffin of the Death Cast. What also didn't help was the Japanese economy, having plunged into a recession in 2000, which forced Sega to really look at themselves and make some hard decisions. Now, something I did not know before researching for this video is that this was, for a little while, going to be the very real end of Sega, like in totality. On January 31st, 2001, Sega announced they were ceasing production of their current console, and a simultaneous roar of disapproval and regret from Sega kids was heard from the stratosphere. Along with this announcement, Sega also outlined their plans to focus on software, and that you'd see their games release on other machines within the next year. But things could have gone very differently because, unbeknownst to many, Sega was almost bankrupt.
Jeez, and I'm so glad the rest is history and they're doing now. I mean, all their amazing games like, what is it, Total War, my Yakuza franchise, they're making so many good games there, and I just think Sega still holds an absolutely amazing standard in video games, and, it's been a bumpy road at times, but I certainly would not want to live in a world without Sega. It certainly wouldn't be the same. They certainly make my day a little bit brighter.
What? No money?
The only reason the company still exists today is because of the generosity of just one man. The company that owned a majority stake in Sega was CSK Holdings, and chairman Asayo Okawa was the boss. People expected him to give the order for Sega to be shut down when the writing was clearly on the wall in 2000, but instead he loaned Sega $500 million of his own money to pay off their outstanding debts.
£370 million, converting that, so that's like probably almost 500 million US dollars back over 20 years ago. That ain't chump change.
Going above and
That's a
beyond,
big
he
gift.
then
Someone
waived
give
that
me that.
loan on his deathbed 2
Sound like
years
Dark Side Phil
later.
now.
When he did pass away due to cancer, he gifted Sega back his own personal shares, totaling $695 million, which is what made it possible for Sega to even turn into a publisher in the first place.
Imagine loving a company that much that everything you are and is goes back to him once dude, man, what a legacy. That's incredible. I mean, I hope his family got something when the poor guy passed away. He is probably like to his wife, you got nothing. Good day, ma'am. I said good day. Anyway.
You can't just go between being a hardware and then software company overnight. You need a lot of capital to make that transition. Capital Sega didn't even have. With that huge cash injection though, we saw Sonic on Nintendo consoles, Shenmue 2 as an Xbox exclusive in the West, and Virtua Fighter on the PS2, which years before would have been seen as sheer heretical lunacy. Since then, Sega has had your proverbial dizzying highs, terrifying lows, and creamy middles, and overall seems to be doing okay now.
Yeah, you know, that sort of like late 2000s, early 2010s period was a lot of experimentation. And I mean, you have to take risks like that as a company, because look at Sega now with all their great franchises and games. They've really found their feet again.
Hell, every September, stans say they swear a Dreamcast 2 is in the works, despite
ages,
Sega
wasn't it?
insisting they are a software publisher first and
Yeah,
foremost.
everyone was trying to tell me that there was a Sega Dreamcast 2 coming on the internet, and I think that was derived from the fact that Sega was hinting on a new console. And if I'm not mistaken, they brought out some limited edition mini like Game Gear sets or something that people didn't at all freaking ask for. But a lot of people were just assuming that we were going to get another Dreamcast.
Further proving that the dream is indeed over. Oof, that was a crazy one. Thanks to C2 4U for nominating the subject of this episode. And if
Yeah. Hey, that was a great video. Thank you, Matt McMuscles. And make sure you're giving him a sub, us a sub as well. Let us know your Sega Dreamcast memories, guys. This was an absolutely awesome video. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.